Page 229, continuing our lesson 4.8 on dependent and independent variables. Bike shop rents beach cruiser bikes and mountain bikes. Customers can rent these items by the day or the week. What are the independent and dependent variables involved in the cost of the rental? So first of all, kind of here's some information. Okay, and then based off of that, we can think about different variables, different things that might change. So things that might change would be what we're renting, whether we're renting a beach cruiser or a mountain bike, the length of the rental, okay, how long we're renting it for, the price per day or the price per week, depending on which one of those we're doing, and then the total rental cost. And you know, a little modification here maybe would be, we could say the cost of the beach cruiser, the cost of the mountain bike. Okay, those are things that could be changed. So then step 2, determine whether they're independent or dependent. So the cost of the beach cruiser is dependent because it depends on the rate per day or week. Okay, our cost depends how much they say it's going to cost per day or week. The cost of the mountain bike, same thing. It's dependent on how much the rate is per day or week. The length of the rental is independent, and it causes the total rental cost to change. The price per day is independent, and it causes the total rental cost to change. And then the price per week is independent and causes the total rental cost to change. So, you know, one of the things is, you know, looking at what our cost is. You know, what's the cost of the beach cruiser? Well, it depends on how long we rent it, and also what the rental costs are per day or per week. How much does the mountain bike cost to rent? It depends on how long we rent it and the cost per day and per week. On the try it, Jenna wants to rent a mountain bike by the week. Identify independent variables that affect the total rental cost. Okay, so we've just talked about what all the different variables are possibly. So out of that list of what we just looked at, we can think about independent variables out of that list that are going to affect our rental costs. So for this problem, we could say that the total rental cost is affected by the length of the rental, which is L, make kind of a cursive L, and the price per week, which is W. So L and W would be our independent variables that are affecting our total rental costs for the mountain bike by the week. In doing this, our total cost is dependent variable, we said, and it makes sense if you think about it, because what's our cost? Well, it depends on what we're renting, how long we're renting it for. In this case, you know, renting it by the week, so length of the rental then puts us into the price per week, and then the price per week depending how much they charge for that. And again, the fact that it's a mountain bike would be kind of a, in this case, you could argue as a mountain bike kind of being an independent variable, as something we're just choosing there. So key concepts we have, again, dependent variable changes in response to another variable, which is the independent variable. Independent variable causes the change. It's independent because its value is not affected by other variables. Okay, so for example, distance a car travels, D, is dependent on the speed at which it travels. How far you go depends on how fast you're going. So speed is independent, distance is dependent. So on page 230, if we look at the do you understand, number 2. So Jake and Viola record the number of miles M they bike to help track the number of calories C they burn in an hour. Viola says the number of calories C they burn is the dependent variable. Do you agree and explain? Okay, so if we think about this, we've got the number of miles M that we're biking and the calories that they're burning. So what I usually like to do is think about it both ways. You know, does this depend on this or does that depend on the other one? Okay, so in other words, we can think about, does the number of miles they bike depend on how many calories they burn in an hour, or does the number of calories they burn in an hour depend on how many miles they bike? And so she is actually correct then, because the second one of what we said makes sense. Number of calories they burn depends on how many miles they bike. So if we look at some problems on the do you know how, they want us to identify the independent variable and the dependent variable. And when we write these out, if you want to abbreviate like DEP for dependent, independent, you can abbreviate IND just to make it where it's a little bit less writing. Okay, and so like I said earlier, if you want to think about these both ways, so on number 4, amount of money earned if T raffle tickets are sold. So we could think about, you know, does the amount of money earned depend on how many raffle tickets are sold, or does the number of raffle tickets that are sold depend on the amount of money earned? And usually, hopefully, one of those sounds more correct to you. So for this one then, independent would be T and dependent would be M. In other words, the ticket sold, whatever, and then we make the amount of money off that. Similar to what we talked about with the apples in example 1. Okay, which came first? In this case, we are selling tickets first, and then we're earning money off of those. Okay, so the thing that comes first is usually an independent variable. All right, number 5, number of hours H worked and the amount of money M earned. So we can think about, does the number of hours you work depend on how much money you earn, or does the amount of money you earn depend on how many hours you work? So the money you earn is going to depend on how many hours you work. You have to work first and then you earn the money. And so that means H, the hours you work, is going to be independent, and the amount of money earned is going to be dependent. Look at number 6. Number of shelves S in a bookcase and the number of books B the bookcase can hold. So we want to think about the number of shelves in the bookcase depends on how many books it can hold, or the number of books it can hold depends on the number of shelves. So in this case, the independent variable would be S, dependent variable would be B. In other words, we had the bookshelf first, and then based off of what the bookshelf is, that's going to determine how many books it can hold. Okay? Books it can hold depends on how many shelves there are. Number 7, number of pages P you read in your book in H hours. So number of pages depends on the number of hours you read, or hours you read depends on the number of pages. So independent would be the number of hours. Dependent would be P, the number of pages. Okay, the number of pages you read depends on how long, how many hours that you've been reading your book. Okay, if you read longer, you're going to read more pages, right? And that's usually the case. Usually if time is involved, not 100% of the time, but I'd say probably 99% of the time, if time is involved, that's almost always the independent variable, because time just keeps on moving no matter what else is happening. So number 8, number of gallons G of water a garden hose produces after running for M minutes. So we could say, does the number of gallons of water depend how many minutes the hose has been running, or the number of minutes the hose has been running depends on the number of gallons of water the hose produces. So the gallons of water depends on how many minutes it's been running. So independent, once again, is our time. In this case, M for minutes. It's independent. And dependent is G, our number of gallons. Gallons depends on how long it's been running. We're going to skip over number 9. Some of these, just the wordings are a little bit off. Number 10, number of hours H you spend driving at the speed of R miles per hour. So number of hours you spend driving depends on your speed, or your speed depends on the number of hours you are driving. So for this one, should be independent would be R, and the dependent would be H. In other words, how long it takes you. Let's say you have a goal in mind of where you're going to drive. So how long it takes you to get there depends on what your speed is. So it depends on means the time you spend depends on, and this is a case actually where this is an exception. That's that 1% where actually the time is actually dependent on something else. Because in this case, think of it as not necessarily just time, but it's hours you spend driving. So it's not just a time for the sake of time, but it's, how long is it going to take you to get somewhere.